Hello everyone, it's Pam. Today I'm going to do a tutorial, my first ever video tutorial on a technique I call Distress Texture Paste Embossing. So basically I'm going to use texture paste from Ranger, and I'm going to use Distress Embossing powder over the texture paste, and then we're going to heat emboss it. It gives a really cool texture because you have both the texture of the paste as well as that rough texture of the Distress Embossing powders. I'm going to use this with a stencil today. I chose Tim's burlap stencil because I've been working with his new fresh brewed dies and stamps, and I just absolutely love the coffee stamps and the coffee dies, and I think the burlap makes a great background for that, given that coffee beans come in those burlap bags, and I was inspired by this great photo on the wall at Starbucks of a burlap coffee bean bag. So I'm going to use the burlap stencil today and show you how to do this technique. So I'm using a manila tag. You can use anything. You can use cardstock, you can use watercolor paper, anything you want. But I'm going to use a manila tag, and I'm just going to place my stencil over it. I like to secure my stencil when I use texture paste because that way it doesn't move on me while I'm spreading the paste. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And you could hold it if you wanted to, but that's up to you. Okay, so I'm going to spread the texture paste with a palette knife. I use the ones from Viva Decor. Really love these. Nice strong wooden handles. They are very sharp, so when you clean them off, be very careful. I've cut myself many times. Okay, so we're going to take some texture paste here, and we're going to just start spreading it onto the tag. And again, this spread's very creamy. It's very creamy, very much like frosting. And you can do a very thick layer and make it bumpy and lumpy, or you can put it on and then just scrape it off so that just the part under the stencil is covered. I like that technique, but a lot of folks like to use, you know, different bumps and lumps across it, because especially if you're doing mixed media, you can kind of do what your preference is. So I'm going to finish this up real quick here. Make sure I like mine nice and smooth. All right. Now once the texture paste is on there, obviously it's still wet, so that is when we're going to be able to apply the Distress Embossing powder, and it will stick. Couple of quick things. You want to make sure you clean off your palette knife right away because it gets very sticky and this stuff dries real quick. So, and then also same thing with your stencil. I usually just throw it in a bucket of water, which I have sitting next to me over here, and let it soak. It's over here. I just let it soak in the bucket of water until I have time to clean, which is later. So now we have our tag, which has the beautiful embossing, texture paste on it. So it's got that great texture. Now we're going to add even more texture by placing the embossing powder on top. Clean up my work surface right here first. And you do need to get the texture paste off of the mat. I use the Ranger nonstick craft sheet because it comes off so easily. This is great. And get that off of there. Okay. So to apply the Distress Embossing powder, you're going to basically do what you would do if you just had embossing ink on here. You notice that this curls a little bit because of the texture paste, but that's okay. We can get it to uncurl later. So I'm going to shake my embossing powder. Today I'm using Vintage Photo and Antique Linen. And what I'm going to do is just spread a little bit over the top. And I'm going to mix these colors, so that's why I'm kind of doing it in random areas. And I'm going to do a little bit of the Antique Linen, which makes it look a little bit more like straw. And kind of mix those two. And then when these both come off, I actually have a jar of it already mixed, so I can use this to kind of have a different color. I'll throw some of that on. This is actually just both of them mixed together from doing many of these tags. And it kind of gives another shade. So I will put that on as well. Now, I'm just going to tip this sideways so it falls off in a line so that we have the colors kind of not all mixing together or covering one another. So you can see that we have the browns, we have the Antique Linen, and then some in the middle. This needs to be set aside to dry. The reason I'm not going to heat emboss it right away is because the heat embossing of the texture paste will make it puff up. Just put putting this back in the jar here. And that, if you want a puffy look, then you can do it right away. I don't like the puffy look. I want that textury, vintagey look, and that's, you know, the sandpaper-ish texture. So you won't get that same texture if I were to heat emboss this right now, because if you heat wet texture paste, it tends to puff. So I'm going to set that aside to dry. Usually I set it aside to dry overnight, but a couple hours it should be dry, depending on where you live, obviously. This is one that is finished. This one here is a tag that I've applied the powder on, and it has not been heat embossed yet. So this, I'm going to show you the heat embossing in this. But as you notice, you can tell it's not heat embossed because if I rub it, the powder comes off. Okay, so that's what would happen if we didn't heat emboss it. The powder would come right off. Okay, whereas one that I have finished is this one here, which is completely finished. And this, you can hear that sandpaper-ish sound, and that is the texture you get when you're done. And that's after you've heat embossed it. So I'm going to go ahead and just heat emboss a portion of this really quickly. So heat embossing distress powder is a little tougher because it doesn't take that shine, it just changes color. So you'll notice the darker colors get darker and the lighter colors get lighter when they change color. And sometimes it's very hard to tell, but you just kind of go over it and you can see a very slight change in the color. I just saw the antique linen getting lighter. That just gets a little darker. And you just go over your whole tag like that to set it, just as if you were using it with embossing ink. I'm not going to do the whole tag just to show you. But after you heat it, you can wait a few minutes for it to cool, but you can feel that it's on there like the sandpaper, so you know that that is heat embossed. Whereas again over here, it's coming off. That one we haven't done that side, so that's the texture that you get. And then when it is completely dry, you are going to, and cool, you're going to just wipe off the crystals. You won't get as many crystals off of this as you would if you were using it on embossing ink, because the texture paste tends to hold on to them, but you still can get a little bit off. You see there's a little bit of crystals there. So I love this technique because of all the texture. It's just amazing if you like texture. And I love making backgrounds, so the texture in my backgrounds is super important to me, especially when I'm doing mixed media tags. I did this also with one of Tim's other stencils. I did it with the wood grain, and I just think this is great. This is like a great wood feel to the back, and I can go ahead and color under this or over it and stamp you know, some images and place them on top. Just use it as a great wood grain background, and it's just super, it gives you a little bit more depth than just using the distress powder with embossing ink. So you'll get that texture paste depth, and you can also use it with your stencils without having to try to get the embossing ink inside the stencil areas. So I just really, really like the combination of the textures. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And if you really liked it, please comment on it. That would be great. If you want to see more, definitely comment. It's my first tutorial, so hopefully I'll be doing more and getting a little bit more experience with them. But I appreciate you watching, and have a great day. Happy crafting!